Towering pines and irregular hilltops spread themselves out as far as the human eye can see. The sky is thick with clouds that cling to the tops of the pine and birch, a lush green ascending into a gray that's plump, full of moisture. Beneath the cover is a two-lane road that snakes through trees and hills. A Jeep Grand Cherokee with Idaho plates is the only moving vehicle on this road. Abandoned cars speckled with soft gravel shoulders, some open doors, the interior lights long burnt out. Jack fumbles with the cap of his plastic water bottle, one hand turning the wheel to avoid a discarded suitcase, the other gripping the cap and bottle. Accepting defeat, he chugs the remaining water and tosses the empty bottle into the back seat, both hands returning to the wheel. To his right, he notices movement, a flash of blonde running through green trampled grass, thin hands with vibrant orange nail polish raised to catch his attention. The Jeep comes to a stop and Jack watches the woman jog up to his open passenger window. She's smiling, little strands of blonde clinging to the sweat around her forehead. "I want to see the ocean," she says, her shoulders shifting to accommodate the weight of a gray backpack. Jack does not reply. His eyes examine the orange of her flannel, the way the top 3 buttons are left open only to reveal a navy undershirt that clings to her breasts, and the way a bead of sweat rolls down the flesh pink skin along her neck and chest. "Any chance you're headed that way?" she adds, her left hand letting go of the car door and moving into the back pocket of her cutoffs. "My family used to camp west of Yakima," she says, finally, his voice raised, cracking from lack of use. "Somewhere off US 12. I'm headed there first." She looks at the back seat of his Jeep, empty water bottles gathering next to a duffel bag, packets of beef jerky torn open and consumed in a makeshift gas siphoning kit set off to the side. With a quick nod, she opens the door and slides in, making sure to keep the backpack tight in her grip. "We don't make any stops in populated areas," he says. "We keep to the edges and take the back roads." "Works for me." "I'm Jack," he says while extending his hand. "Pleasure." She reciprocates the gesture and, as though an afterthought, runs her index finger along the vein on the inside of his wrist. Without stating her name, she tells him she had hitchhiked west, caught a ride with some brothers in northern Idaho, and made it to the border before the brothers slipped off into the night with her car and the blankets. "I just want to see the ocean. Never had a chance before." Jack puts the Jeep into drive and continues along the 2-lane road, his mind jumping between thoughts of their destination and the image of her cutoffs. It isn't long before she asks him about the population back home, her eyes focusing on the St. Christopher medallion hanging from his rearview mirror. Jack can't think of a number, but knows he could probably count them all by using 2 hands. She sets her backpack in the back seat and cups the medallion in the palm of her hand. "The patron saint of travelers," she states, while removing the medallion from the mirror. "It works better if you actually wear it." Her body leans closer to him and slides it over his head, the smell of her causing him to shift in his seat and imagine the taste of her skin on his lips. She settles back into the passenger seat and begins to adjust the station dial numbers, turning on the console, but producing no sounds other than static. Jack drags his eyes away from her to scan the edges of the road for openings. "Try the AM stations." He removes one hand from the steering wheel and places his fingers on the St. Christopher resting on his chest. "I got lucky outside of Lewiston, a couple of voices over the airwaves." "Anything good?" she asks while making the switch. Confession. He waits for her to ask more details, but she doesn't, so he continues. "It's funny, I thought those kind of people were the first to go." To the right, a trail just large enough for a single vehicle veers off from the main road and through a series of trees that make a thin passage. He slows and makes the turn, trusting memories from a childhood 15 years distant. There's the sound of branches scraping against metal and passengers bouncing in her seat, twisting the dial and sending the station numbers into a frenzy. From the speakers, an organ begins to play. It's soft at first, but begins to rise with a reverent intensity. Another uneven patch of dirt causes the Jeep to bounce, and the St. Christopher pulls back against black chest hair. Jack winces as voices emerge from the speakers and layers over the organ. "He is risen," they declare. "He is risen." Jack adjusts his hand along the wheel, uncertain of where they should be placed. The chant increases with an intensity until it matches the pitch of the organ, and all sound is consumed. His passenger grips the station dial and turns it, landing on a station full of dead air. It's funny that people think this was some kind of rapture. She folds her hand against her lap and keeps her eyes pinned on the passing trees. What else could it be? He turns to her and sees a smile twist at the corner of her lips. The Jeep slows to a crawl as Jack takes a sharp turn, positioning them along a road that descends through trees and elevation, its endpoint obscured by the shortcomings of the human eye. Jack begins to set up camp just a short hike from a small lake. Clouds maintain a low elevation, and Jack realizes there's no tarp to secure the top of the tent. Near the site, a large pine tree lays on its side, uprooted from a spot several yards distant. Bits of wood cracked from the sudden impact with the ground. His passenger watches with her body leaning against the side of the car, her flannel now draped over the hood. He feels beads of sweat roll down his neck and wonders if there are any on her. It got hotter the further down we drove, her voice ran off. She speaks as though trying to sort through a problem, like the heat is just sitting here. Stagnant. He doesn't answer. She kicks several rocks away from the tires. It used to be you could trust your senses. Now it just feels like all bets are off. Like there are new rules and nobody took a moment to explain them. The passenger is wrapping blonde strands of hair into a tight bun when she announces she's going for a swim. He looks up, catches her fingers hooking around the waist of her cutoffs. She pulls them down, stepping out one foot at a time and adjusting the position of her string bathing suit. "It's not the ocean," she says while removing her top, "but I'll make the most of it." Jack warns her to be careful, and she shoots him a smile. "I never let my guard down." "What's your name?" he calls out. She turns to him with the same smile he witnessed in the car and continues walking, little bits of dust kicking up from her steps. There's more setup to do, but Jack makes sure to pull his swim trunks out of his duffel bag. He moves her backpack from the back seat to reach his own, a small corner of blanket sticking out from her stuffed pack. Approaching the lake, Jack can't see any sign of his passenger swimming. His pace is slowed by fishing gear, and he cranes his neck to try to catch a glimpse of her. Above, the clouds still linger, unmoving and obscuring. The muddy silt beneath him sinks slightly under his weight, and he spots her sitting near the water's edge. Her hair is undone and tangled down her back. Water drips from her skin and puddles in the dirt and pebbles around her. She reminds him of his mother, though she never took a swim, only sat on the edge of the water, teasing it with her pale feet. Jack would sit next to her, swim trunks on but dry. She wore a red bathing suit and would wrap her arms around his shoulders and pull him close. "We're so far away, Jack," she'd whisper with a smile. "You done already?" he asks while setting the fishing rod and tackle box down. She doesn't turn to him. Instead, she begins to knead mud between her fingers, pressing and pulling against the soft earth. "There were snakes in the water," she states while scratching two rocks against each other in the palm of her hand. "A bunch of them slipping in." She lets go and wipes the mud against her legs, the sediment making tiny scratches against her flesh. "Didn't you hear me scream?" He looks at the placid water and then back at her. "I guess I was too far away." "It was a scream, Jack, not a whisper," she says while pushing herself up. Jack keeps his distance, removing bait from the box and attaching it to the hook. He tries to understand how he could have missed her scream, but the only sound he remembered were the roar of the organ. She moves toward the water, toes touching the edge. Jack wants to remind her about the snakes, but he doubts their existence, so he lets that moment pass. Night comes faster than Jack expects, and he rushes to get the fire ready for warmth and light. He's in a daze as he strikes the match and nurtures the flame. The smell of the forest feels foreign to him, as though where he entered no longer exists, and what surrounds him is nothing more than a dirty replica noticed only by its senses other than sight. Somewhere beyond the campsite and across the still water of the lake, a dog barks. Jack's own warmth begins to dwindle as the fire rises with intensity. His passenger sits across from him, partially hidden by darkness and growing flames. Jack was unable to catch a single fish, his line cast out and unmoving, not a single tug. While he had waited, he wondered if animals could get raptured, if God had a place for them too. Flames look up at the night air, hungry and feeding. He catches her gaze from across the fire, gray eyes unblinking. Her flannel loosely drapes over her shoulder, and her feet rub the dirt slowly with a back and forth motion. Was it everything you'd imagined it would be, she asked, her fingers scratching away at orange polish. Jack rises from his position near the campfire, his eyes taking note of how thin and fragile her body seems, how cold she must be just in the bathing suit and flannel. There was that moment in the Jeep when her hands grazed his skin, a flush of warmth, a feeling of heat, but that moment feels as close to him as the memories of his parents smiling, holding him under the night sky. He decides to grab a pack of beef jerky from the Jeep, his feet walking a path that he may have once traversed as a child. Jack had hoped that things would have remained unchanged, that the happiness his family had laid down in this campground would still be present. But around him was nothing but a series of spoiled leftovers, dirt and rocks, and an empty lake. Jack takes the St. Christopher between his thumbs and index finger, the silver feeling him thin and fragile between his grip, his mind recounting all the times he watched someone ascend. Lasted for 7 days. People rising up out of the blue. 7 days of not knowing if you were next, if you were chosen. Most places they just rose up. Some elegantly, others clashing into tree limbs and telephone wires. He imagines his parents rising up, hand in age-spotted hand, their only child cast off beneath them. The car door slams, and the passenger looks up with startled eyes. Jack walks in her direction, hands ripping open the packet of jerky, teeth tearing through the dried meat. Filthy little things, he mumbles to himself. God left behind all the filthy little things. She's still in her bathing suit, and her eyes dart around for the cutoff she removed earlier. He stops a few feet away from her and extends a piece of jerky. There's a long pause before the passenger reaches out for the offering, her orange nail polish chipped in multiple places. Jack is so quick to pull it away from her outstretched hand, he shakes his head no. He extends the jerky once more with your teeth. She's frozen. With her hand outstretched, the campfire pops and she notices the thin hairs on her arm rise up. Jack takes a step closer. With your teeth. She doesn't move. He spits into the fire and moves away from her, mumbling some words under his breath. She thinks she hears the word filthy, but she isn't sure. A ringing has begun in her ears. He sits down at the edge of the fire, teeth chewing St. Christopher daily and casting shadows against the fabric of his shirt. People waited, he says, little flakes of beef falling out of his moving mouth. He wipes his lips with the back of his hand and bites the skin below his knuckles, thinking they'd come back, bodies plummeting from the clouds on the fields, cars, houses. He pauses, looking up at her, but That never happened. The passenger closes her eyes and inhales the smell of smoke and dirt and pine lingering around her. On the exhale, she opens her eyes, her body leaning toward him in the fire. No one really talks about the ones that went to hell, he says. She says nothing. The flames crackle in the expanse of her silence, her eyes glowing with the reflection of all that lay before her. She runs her hand over the fabric of her flannel. Where I came from, I saw a man crumple at the knees, buckling down into himself, bones cracking under the weight of him. I kept expecting to see earth open up, to see flames, to see something clawing at those bodies. Slowly she stands up, his eyes focusing on her own, his hands hanging loosely at the sides, bag of jerky abandoned at his feet. The passenger begins walking toward the Jeep, her movements slow and deliberate. No one touches the body, she adds. When someone rose up, people would latch on and try to keep them grounded, most of the time getting pulled up as well. Jack stands and begins to walk to her, his right hand pulling at the medallion, clutching it along his shirt. Her bare feet step on sharp pebbles, small jolts of pain shooting through her body, her voice trembling. These poor broken bodies pressed into the dirt when they got pulled down. We just watched. Her feet pressed on the jean fabric. She stops. When it all comes down to it, you think it was God? She grabs the cutoffs with her right hand. Jack pushes into her with his chest, her body falling back into the rear of the Jeep, his hands pushed against her waist, his breath heavy against her ear. We're so far away, he says, the palm of his calloused hand gripping her chin, thumb running over her bottom lip. God can't see us here. The first stab is at an awkward angle, the blade of the pocket knife only cutting through the fabric and grazing the skin of Jack's lower back. His reaction is quick. He slams her head into the metal of the Jeep before throwing her to the side, her left arm hitting the Jeep's surfboard. Jack turns to his body to examine the cut. The passenger is quick to rise, the second stab landing just under his ribs. A whimper escapes him. She pulls the knife out and stabs again, her fingers warm with blood. He pulls away, stumbling back into the dirt that clings to his bleeding body. Swaying slightly, she watches him crawl toward the fire like some dying dog, blood trailing behind him, the medallion contorted and tangled around his neck. She opens the Jeep and climbs in, throwing the knife and cutoffs into the passenger seat. The keys are in the ignition and she starts the vehicle, her body sinking into the warm fabric of the driver's seat. Under a sky that is thick with clouds, a Jeep Grand Cherokee maneuvers through a winding road, branches of trees and shrubs scratching against its exterior. The driver grips the wheel tightly, her eyes looking ahead for a passage out of the wilderness that envelops her. Behind her, plastic bottles rattle with every bump, the dirt road a mosaic of sproutings and undergrowth. A clearing emerges as the driver turns the corner, the trees giving way to an open, paved road with miles of darkened sky. The driver breathes, not realizing the amount of time she'd been holding her breath. Somewhere, beyond this road, beyond these trees, beyond this expanse of clouds, the oceans roar. Salt waters crash against rocks and mist sprays onto rolling dunes of sand. She smiles. The rear of the Jeep rises up, wheels pinning out onto open air. Water bottles and jerky packets fall from the back seat and onto the front windshield. A knife falls out of the open passenger window. A pair of cutoffs catch around the side mirror of the vehicle. The Jeep cuts through the black of the clouds, trails of moonlight flickering through the newfound opening. Above, a screen trails off with ascension.